Hello out there, all my bookish friends in BookTube land, and welcome to this episode of Tristan and the Classics, where I'm doing a book haul of 5 books, and 3 of them are absolutely gorgeous. You've just got to see them. So, without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? The first classic book in this haul of 5 classics is a particularly well-known book about World War I. And I've got it because obviously it gets me ready for next month's reading event, World War November. And if you want to join that, just look at my last couple of videos and you can learn about the event that's going on that will give you a targeted reading experience around your interests and around the Great War. Now this book is the great All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque. This is a real classic amongst World War I classics. It's not a huge book, as some people often think it is, but it's touching because in this book, Remarque, being from Germany, he writes the story of a young soldier, a young schoolboy really, who is wound up to be excited about going into the First World War, much like people in Britain were happy and jolly, thinking this is the war to end all wars, and they went leapfrogging down the road to sign up to join this great battle, which would turn out to be one of the most monumental meat grinders in history. Here we have the same, but from the German side. Schoolboys whipped up into a frenzy by their schoolmasters, patriotism, glory, honour, war, heroism, all that. And then coming to the trenches, coming to the stark, cold realization that war is never fun. It is never glorious. It is never noble. And the fear that is encountered, the horror of sights that these young lads have to face. And it's all told in the first person. But what I remember from this is it's told in such ever so slightly disconnected way. I've never thought that the narrator was particularly vivid. It gives there's great accounts, but there seems to be almost a hollow disconnect of emotion at times, as if you would be if you were guarding your mind from breakdown during the horrors of World War I. And it follows, of course, their journey through the war. I'll just read you the opening paragraph so you get a flavour of the writing. We are in camp 5 miles behind the line. Yesterday our relief arrived. Now our bellies are full of bully beef and beans. We've had enough to eat and we're well satisfied. We were even able to fill up a mess tin for later, every one of us, and there are double rations of sausage and bread as well. That will keep us going. We haven't had a stroke of luck like this for ages. The cook sergeant, the one with the ginger hair, is actually offering to dish out food, beckoning with his serving ladle to anyone who comes near him and giving him a massive helping. He's getting a bit worried because he can't see how he's going to empty his cooking pot. Chaden and Muller have dug out a couple of washing bowls from somewhere and got him to fill them up to the brim as a reserve supply. Chaden does things like that out of sheer greed. With Muller, it's a precaution. Nobody knows where Chaden puts it all. He's as thin as a rake, and he always has been. So that's the opening paragraph of All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque. The second classic on my book haul is a book I've not read but have known about and wanted to read for a good while. So when I stumbled across this in my rummage around my local second-hand bookshop, I was delighted. It is Italo Svevo's Zeno's Conscience. Have you read this? So the idea behind Zeno's Conscience is we have a character and narrator using the book as a sort of memoir, and he's in an institution. He's being looked after by a doctor who's psychoanalyzing him, and the doctor has to go away, and he says to Zeno, what would help me in understanding your psyche is for you to write down your memories. And so Zeno thinks, okay, I'll do that. And so begins the memoir. Now what's so good about the way this is written that I've looked into is it's not just some chronological movement through his life. He struggles at the beginning with knowing, well, where do you begin when you're told to write about your life? And so we have large chapters where he gets sucked into remembering certain significant events in his life. Now, the image on the front of this, I don't know if you can see it, is a bunch of cigarettes, all partly smoked. Because Zeno started smoking young, and then he remembers his first smoke, but he also remembers his last smoke when he wanted to give up, and how he was constantly plagued by last smokes because he couldn't give up. We also look at his venture into business. We look at him meeting his wife and they're getting married. We look at his father getting ill. And playing through all of this in the background is the doctor who looks after him. In fact, the doctor releases these memoirs to the public as sort of a revenge act because Zeno keeps disappearing and not doing what he's supposed to do. So it's a very modern piece of work. It's exploring the inner psychoanalytical part of the human nature. It's not written in the classic way of writing, of just telling a chronological tale and story. It's very introspective, and I am thoroughly looking forward to reading this book. I will read you the opening paragraph. Review my childhood. More than half a century stretches between that time and me, but my far-sighted eyes could perhaps perceive it if the light still glowing there were not blocked by obstacles of every sort, outright mountain peaks, all my years and some of my hours. The doctor has urged me not to insist stubbornly on trying to see all that far back. Recent things can also be valuable, and especially fantasies and last night's dreams. But there should be at least some kind of order. And to help me begin ab ovo, the moment I left the doctor, who is going out of town shortly and will be absent from Trieste for some time, I brought and read a treatise on psychoanalysis, just to make the task easier. It's not hard to understand, but it's very boring. And so that's how Zeno's Conscience starts. Quite a quirky introduction to a character. I'm very excited about this book. The next 3 books up on this haul are all beautiful books, beautiful editions, and I can't wait to share them with you. 2 of them I already have, but I had to get these. So the first one up is Martin Chuzzlewit. I'll try and hold that closer. Martin Chuzzlewit by Charles Dickens. And this is from the Nonsuch Dickens, a particular print. They are beautiful. They're large, hardbound books, cloth covered, and they're just delicious. If I just open up into the central page, can you see that? It's just a picture of Charles Dickens, just covering the inside. We have a ribbon for keeping our book marked wherever we've got to. And this comes with loads of the original illustrations from Hublot Knight, or better known as Fizz, and some of the others that sketched for Dickens. Now, the book itself, Chuzzlewit, is a big book. But the way this is written, huge margins are placed inside. Huge margins. So if I wanted to annotate in this book, I could. I'm not sure whether I will, though. But nonetheless, the writing is so big as well. And when you're reading a big book like this, I do find hardbacks so much more useful because they just stay open. They don't strain your fingers. In case you haven't read Martin Chuzzlewit, in this book, Dickens gives us 2 of his most wicked characters. You have Seth Pecksniff. You get a whole bunch of Pecksniffs, the family, and the way they behave is just terrible. But Seth is an absolute bounder. And also you have Jonas Chuzzlewit. He is also the bad guy. However, the book is called Martin Chuzzlewit because our protagonist is the young Martin Chuzzlewit, who's named after his grandfather, who also raised him. His grandfather has a maid that waits on him as well, and he says to her, "I'll pay you as long as I'm alive. I'll give you an income." And that's to encourage her not to bump him off, because he's aware that certain ones of his family are very grasping and they just want him to die so they can grab his money. I can't go into too much detail about the story because it's just so vast. But Martin tries to make his way after having a fallout with his grandfather, and he gets involved with the Pecksniffs. And there's a particular angle on selfishness that Dickens is exploring. All of his books explore aspects of society and often a particular characteristic. Sometimes he nails that characteristic to one person, called a humour. But this we'll see the idea shared amongst a lot of the characters. And of course, Martin Chuzzlewit, famous book because he ends up going to America, where Dickens had been. And some of his descriptions of America in here cause a bit of a rumpus amongst the American cousins. They thought he was being a bit derogatory towards them, but Dickens did say this is only a satire, and he particularly lampoons hucksters, rogues, avid capitalists, and slavery appears in here, and violence. So be ready for that. But although not his most popular book, he actually really liked it himself. He thought it was one of his better works. And so I'm just delighted to have this in such a beautiful edition. I'll just read the first paragraph of the book, and this is typically Dickensian in its introduction. As no lady or gentleman with any claims to polite breeding can possibly sympathise with the Chuzzlewit family without being first assured of the extreme antiquity of the race, it is a great satisfaction to know that it undoubtedly descended in a direct line from Adam and Eve, and was, in the very earliest times, closely connected with the agricultural interest. If it should ever be urged by grudging and malicious persons that a Chuzzlewit in any period of the family history displayed an overweening amount of family pride, surely the weakness will be considered not only pardonable, but laudable, when the immense superiority of the house to the rest of mankind in respect of this its ancient origin is taken into account. A typically theatrical, almost muse that opens up this book. We know the story is going to be around a clan, the Chuzzlewits, and the Pecksniffs are related. The next classic book in this haul, to my absolute delight, was another Nonsuch Dickens. By the way, these are in pristine condition. There's not a mark in the pages, there's not a scuff on the book. And they were only £1 each. So I'm absolutely thrilled, and actually I wouldn't mind collecting the whole lot. So if any of you see a Nonsuch Dickens out there on the internet, please leave me a comment and share the link to me, Instagram or wherever, so that I can maybe track all of them down. Now this one is Little Dorritt. Little Dorritt, probably more popular than Martin Chuzzlewit, well definitely. Through time it's gone up and down in its reception with the public, but undoubtedly a great, great work. There are some dry patches because this deals with debtor's prison, which I'll come to in a minute. And I just want to say, I can't remember how this ends. I know it's actually supposed to be one of the most moving endings, but I feel that I read this so many years ago and maybe I never actually finished reading it. But there are certain characters who I remember. So the story of Little Dorritt. Little Dorritt is one of 3 children to a Mr. William Dorritt who lives in Marshalsea Debtors' Prison. Now, Debtors' Prison was, if you couldn't pay your debts back in the 19th century, you were sent to a debtors' prison where you were supposed to work off your debts, but you weren't allowed to leave the prison. It wasn't as harsh as, say, Newgate Prison. The problem was you couldn't make a living there. And so it was a strange bureaucratic anomaly which kept people in penury. However, he has 3 children, Tip, that's Edward, Fanny, and Little Dorritt, of course, Amy. And she's called Little Dorritt because she's born in the prison. Now, she can go in and out because she's not actually in debt, and she tries to use her time to earn some money to pay off her father's debts, but she never refers to it because she's a good daughter. Now, while you've got that going on, that story, you have another story. This actually opens up in Marseille, in another prison. It's not a debtor's prison. You actually start with a murderer telling his story. Also in Marseille are these people who have been quarantined called the Clenhams. Arthur Clenham is the main character, one of the main characters. And Arthur, he'd been working in China when his father died, and he sent him home and said, "Give your mother this watch." And inside the watch are the letters DNF etched in beads, which is quite funny for booktubers, because that's me, did not finish. But for this, it meant do not forget. So when Arthur presents this to his mother, Mrs. Clenham, he says, "What's all that about? What are you told not to forget?" But she won't tell him. No matter how much he presses, she won't tell him what she isn't to forget. And then you're introduced to a guy called Jeremiah Flintwich, typically brilliant Dickensian name, and he starts asking her, why won't you tell him? Why didn't you tell Arthur what the story was behind that watch? Now, there are a bunch of other characters. I mean, this book is nigh on 800 pages long. Typical of Dickens, it's got this tangled, weaving web throughout it. And there's so many crisscrosses. The Clennams, of course, cross with the Dorrits. But you've also got the Meagles in there. And one of their maids, who they nicknamed Tattycoram. She's a pretty thing, and there's an interest between some of the characters. But it's the way it all works out, and the good-naturedness of some of the low people, like William Dorritt, like Amy, but how horrible society is. And the central thing on this book is imprisonment. It's not just debtor's prison. Like I said, it opens in a prison in France, but there's also mental imprisonment, conscious imprisonment. There is societal imprisonment in the societal order of things. And he takes an absolute laser beam focus on bureaucracy in Britain, so much so that you'll be familiar with it in whatever country you are today, how bureaucracy can be absurd. And he refers to it as the circumlocution office. Now, circumlocution means to talk around about, not to get to the point. And isn't that exactly what bureaucracy is? So Dickens puts on his, satirical eye and has a wink at society once again and draws a ton of pictures of characters whom we recognise instantly. Granted, lots of them are puppets on a string to play around the main characters. But I'll tell you one fascinating detail about this book. Someone who loved it was Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky, the great composer, thought this book was absolutely excellent. So let's read the first paragraph. 30 years ago, Marseille lay burning in the sun one day. A blazing sun upon a fierce August day was no greater rarity in southern France than at any other time before or since. Everything in Marseille and about Marseille had stared at the fervid sky and been stared at in return until a staring habit had become universal there. Strangers were stared out of countenance by staring white houses, staring white walls, staring white streets, staring tracts of arid road, staring hills from which verdure was burnt away. The only things to be seen not fixedly staring and glaring were the vines, drooping under their load of grapes. These did occasionally wink a little, as the hot air barely moved their faint leaves. I mean, that's just really, really good writing. That's, talk about giving you that arid, languorous, lackadaisical feeling in yourself because of the oppressive heat. That was just brilliant writing. But Little Dorrit, set in Marshalsea prison in Britain, you would not expect to start in the town of Marseille, France. The fifth and final book on this classic book haul is another absolutely beautiful book, but more than that, one of the best adventures in classic literature you'll ever read. It's as exciting today as it was when it was written over 100 years ago. And it is the wonderful Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. I don't know if you can see this. I don't know if you can see how beautiful that is. This edition is a special edition. It's from the Templar Company, Templar Co. And they make some beautiful editions which are fully illustrated. And they use in this my favourite illustrator, which is Robert Ingpen. Now, if you want to read a classic book to your children, which has those pictures which light up their mind, which you can see them just staring at quietly in a corner, and their whole imagination, you can see a universe of thoughts and adventures going on right there as they stare. This is the kind of book you want, Robert Ingpen's illustrations. I may have to come closer to the camera because I just need you to see how good these illustrations are. But what is the story about? In case you don't know, you're bound to have heard the words Jim Hawkins, made iconic in the old film with "Arr, Jim lad." This also has the pirate Long John Silver with the peg leg, sort of making the eponymous pirate character with the hook hand and the peg leg. Long John Silver was a ship's cook under the previous Captain Flint, who has died, but there was a treasure buried somewhere on Treasure Island. Now, we start the story with Jim Hawkins, a young lad with his mum, his father's died, still running the Admiral Benbow Inn. And it's while he's there is a pirate who comes with a long cutlass slash in his face. And he comes to the inn and he sings a song, 15 men on a dead man's chest, yo ho ho and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil have done for the rest, yo ho ho and a bottle of rum. And this guy he's got a lot of money, but he's quite aggressive and he lives in fear of a man with one leg. And this gets burnt into Jim's mind. Now, things happen. And Jim is moved along towards Bristol, where he goes to the Spyglass Inn, which is a very famous house in literature. And then they set sail. And they set sail on their boat, and guess who's on it? He meets Long John Silver, a pirate with one leg. And he's so friendly and wonderful, but then so begins an adventure that doesn't stop rolling. This is brilliantly written, brilliantly executed, high flights of fancy, but all kept within a believable framework. If you like to read to your children, read this book to them. It is outstanding. I think someone once said that Treasure Island is a book written for boys, but actually really for their fathers and grandfathers, okay? I know that's kept it all on the male side, but the truth is, the older you are, the more you love this. This is a sublime read. If you've not read Treasure Island, read it. And once you've read it, if you like it, go and get hold of the one with Robert Ingpen's illustrations in it, because it is just an absolute gorgeous thing. And would you believe all these books I actually picked up for £4. So I was delighted with my book haul today. So that was my book haul. We had All Quiet on the Western Front, Zeno's Conscience, Martin Chuzzlewit, Little Dorritt, and Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. What are you reading at the moment? Let me know in the comments down below.